Hi, my name is Cynthia, and I'd like to share some interesting information that I discovered on sex and gender and questioning whether sex and gender matter. How can gender be determined? Well, one way is while the fetus is still in the womb. There are certain tests that a pregnant woman can have performed. These tests performed can determine fetal abnormalities like chromosomal abnormalities. They're called amniocentesis or chronic villus sampling. Doctors usually suggest that women have that around their 10th week of pregnancy. Another non invasive way to determine gender or the sex of the unborn fetus is by a simple ultrasound. It's less invasive and it depends on what position the fetus is lying in. Once the fetus is born, the fetus develops an identity, which is usually displayed through cultural norms, whether male or female, through specific genes. They get eyes and they get personalities that they develop while living in their homes with their families. Specific genes promote their genetic makeup. The male or female develop certain traits, behaviors, and characteristics in accordance to what is shared through family generations. Then they move on and start socializing outside the home. Socialization changes gender roles in the child because they have matured into their own, capable of learning right from wrong, becoming independent in their decisions as they move into adulthood. One of the examples is in certain cultures, there are arranged marriages. They may refuse to partake in an arranged marriage. They may not marry the opposite sex. They may marry the same sex. And for a woman, especially working at a job that was considered a woman's job, now may work in construction. Gender roles have evolved and are continue to evolve. Gender roles have become diagnostic and are used to determine health-related diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, and hypertension. This is found through research quantitative data, gathering information using culture, age, sex, and suggesting higher incidence in certain cultures. So how do we measure gender roles? There's no real test to determine gender roles. Sex and gender often interact, suggesting that differences between men and women might be due to a combination of both biological, social, cultural factors with no proven facts. The Bern sex role is a method of measuring gender masculinity and femininity used to research gender roles. The goal of the Bern sex role is to examine psychologically and provide empirical evidence revealing the advantage of shared masculine and feminine personality traits, thus promoting a sex typical categorization. This categorization is not an adequate measure of gender, in my opinion. The scale is a measure of masculinity and femininity, which is used to research gender roles. The scale identifies the person's psychological trait using measured sources from 1 to 7 in response to the person's response to the questions that were asked. For instance, when I took the test, it determined that my score was 5 point something, which made me androgynous. If a male or female should score 4, that person would be considered in the middle. In other words, half man, half woman traits. The scale is culture specific, which is not reflected during the question and answer portion. So how adequate is that? How reliable is that? I feel the scale is not an adequate measure of gender. Why? Because the scoring does not include cultural specifics, and I believe a woman who possesses a powerful personality, is a leader, self-directed, and assured in her capabilities, who scored greater than a 5 should not be considered androgynous for the characteristics suggestive of. Can gender be measured in a dichotomous variable? According to statistics, How To, which stated, a dichotomous variable are categorical variables with two categories or levels. The Burns sex role has two variables, male and female. The article also mentioned that the dichotomous variables can be continuous or discrete. The article used the example dead or alive as variables. Well, one knows you either have to be dead or alive. You cannot be both. When the dichotomous variable is applied to the male and female, the end result of the variable would be continuous. Why? In our current society, we have men transforming their body to physically fit the description of a female and vice versa. So I guess the gender can be measured. I guess the gender can be measured as dichotomous. There are many variables to sex and gender testing. In Burns sex role, testing the physiological and genetic testing can be suggestive in a female to have elevated testosterone levels without male physical characteristics. The presence of testosterone could present in genetic testing of a female, which could be inherited from the parent's genetic makeup, resulting in a condition named complete androgen insensitivity syndrome. The male carries the lytic cells of the testes, which produces testosterone. In a normal woman without complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, testosterone levels are low. When we take a look at women in sports and the controversy surrounding should or should not they join a men's team or take hormones to decrease their testosterone levels in order to compete is unethical. Their condition may be of cost, and with or without proper diagnostic testing, those persons should not be ostracized for their genetic makeup passed on to them from the womb. The athletes did not ask for this condition. Meanwhile, the athletes are embracing their conditions. Measuring gender infringes upon the athlete's right to privacy. It is indirectly abusive, disrespectful, and unfair. In conclusion, you can't judge a book by its cover. This concludes my discussion on gender roles.